The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Beatrice Sullivan knew her life was about to change forever as she pressed one hand against her swollen belly and wondered if the rancher who had sent for her would turn her away the moment he saw her condition. The year was 1878, and Del Rio, Texas, baked under the relentless afternoon sun like a loaf of bread in an oven. Beatrice had been traveling for 3 weeks from Philadelphia, each day bringing her closer to either salvation or ruin. She stepped carefully down from the coach, her worn traveling dress doing little to conceal the fact that she was nearly 7 months along. The other passengers had stopped asking questions after the first few days, their silence more damning than any words could have been. "This the last stop, madam," the driver said, tipping his hat but keeping his eyes averted. He had been kind enough during the journey, never pressing her about her circumstances, and for that small mercy Beatrice was grateful. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting her single battered trunk as he lowered it to the ground. The town itself was small but bustling. A row of wooden buildings lined the main street, their false fronts reaching toward the cloudless sky as if trying to make Del Rio appear grander than it was. Horses stood tied to hitching posts, switching their tails against the flies. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. Beatrice smoothed her dress and tried to catch her breath. The heat was oppressive, nothing like the crisp springs of Philadelphia. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead, trickling down her back. Her feet ached from the journey, and the baby was pressing hard against her ribs. She had written to James Jensen 2 months ago, responding to his advertisement in the Philadelphia Gazette. He had written back promptly, enclosing money for passage and expressing his eagerness to have a wife to help manage his ranch. They had exchanged 3 letters in total, enough for Beatrice to know that he was 30 years old, owned a cattle ranch outside of town, and had been widowed for 2 years. She knew he was looking for companionship and help with his home. What she had not told him was that she was pregnant with another man's child, a man who had promised to marry her and then disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. Standing there in the Texas heat, Beatrice felt the full weight of her deception. She had nowhere else to go. Her parents had died of fever the previous year, and her only brother had made it clear she was not welcome in his home, not in her condition. The shame of an unmarried pregnant woman was too much for his reputation to bear. She had spent the last of her savings on necessities, and the money James had sent had been her lifeline. But now, seeing the reality of where she had come, knowing she would have to face this stranger and watch his face change from welcome to disgust, she wanted nothing more than to climb back into that stagecoach and disappear. Beatrice Sullivan. The voice was deep and warm, touched with a Texas drawl that softened the consonants. Beatrice turned and found herself looking up at a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean, and they were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore simple rancher's clothing, a dark shirt and denim pants, with a worn leather vest and dusty boots. A hat was pushed back on his head, and she could see the line where the sun had darkened his face. This, she knew with sudden certainty, was James Jensen. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Jensen." "That would be me," he said, taking a step closer. His gaze had not wavered from her face, and she realized with a strange flutter in her chest that he had not yet looked down, had not yet noticed her condition. "I am glad you arrived safely. The journey from Philadelphia is not an easy one." "No," she agreed, and then, because there was no way to avoid it, because he would see in a moment anyway, she forced herself to speak the truth. "Mr. Jensen, There is something I must tell you, something I should have written in my letters, but I was frightened and desperate, and I—" Her voice broke, and she felt tears burning behind her eyes. It was then that James finally looked down, and Beatrice watched as his gaze traveled over her swollen middle. She saw his eyes widen slightly, saw him draw in a sharp breath. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Around them, the town continued its business, but for Beatrice, everything had narrowed to this moment, to the expression on this stranger's face as he processed what he was seeing. "You are with child," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Beatrice whispered. "I am so sorry. I should have told you. I know this is not what you wanted, not what you expected. If you want me to leave, I understand. I do not have the money for passage back, but I can work. I can find some way to repay what you spent on bringing me here." She was rambling now, her words tumbling over each other, but she could not seem to stop. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, running down her cheeks despite her best efforts to maintain some shred of dignity. James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between her face and her belly. Then he did something that shocked her to her core. He reached out and very gently touched her shoulder, a gesture of comfort so unexpected that it stopped her flood of words. "How far along are you?" he asked quietly. "Nearly 7 months," she admitted, her voice shaking, "and the father, gone. He wanted nothing to do with me once he knew. He was not the man I thought he was." James nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had been thinking. Then he glanced around at the people passing by, at the curious looks being cast their way. "This is not the place for this conversation," he said. "You must be exhausted from your journey. Let me take you to the ranch. We can talk there, somewhere private." "I understand if you do not want to marry me," Beatrice said quickly. "I deceived you, and that was wrong of me. But please, if you could just give me a few days to figure out what to do, where to go." "Miss Sullivan," James said, and there was something in his voice that made her meet his eyes. "That baby needs a father, a name. And I am guessing you need somewhere safe to have that child and raise it. Now, I am not saying I have all the answers right this minute, but I am not the kind of man who turns a woman away when she is in need. So please, let me take you home, let you rest, and we will figure this out together." The kindness in his words nearly undid her completely. She had expected anger, rejection, perhaps even cruelty. Instead, this stranger was offering her grace. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and James picked up her trunk as easily as if it weighed nothing and led her to a wagon waiting nearby. The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour, following a dusty road that wound through scrubland dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. James did not speak much during the journey, but his silence was not unkind. He pointed out landmarks, told her a bit about the area, asked if she was comfortable. Beatrice found herself stealing glances at him, trying to understand this man who had not turned her away. His profile was strong, his jaw firm, and there were lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His hands on the reins were capable and steady, and she noticed they were scarred and calloused from hard work. The Jensen ranch appeared in the distance, rising out of the landscape like a promise. It was not grand, but it was solid and well-maintained. The main house was built of adobe and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There was a barn, a corral with horses, and several other outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Beatrice could see a small creek winding through the property. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, so different from the green hills of Pennsylvania that it might as well have been another world. James helped her down from the wagon with careful hands, as if he was aware of her delicate condition. "Come inside," he said. "You should rest. The heat can be brutal if you are not used to it." The interior of the house was dim and cool, a relief after the blazing sun. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. The furniture was simple but sturdy, clearly made for function rather than beauty. Everything was neat, though there was a certain bareness to the space that spoke of a man living alone without a woman's touch. "I will show you the bedroom," James said. "It was my wife's. Well, ours, I suppose, though she only lived here for 6 months before the fever took her." There was grief in his voice, old but still present, and Beatrice felt a pang of sympathy for him. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly. "Thank you. It has been 2 years now. I have made my peace with it, mostly." He opened a door off the main room to reveal a small bedroom with a large bed covered in a simple quilt. "You rest here. I will bring in some water so you can wash up, and then I will make us something to eat." "You do not have to wait on me," Beatrice protested. "I can help. I am pregnant, not an invalid." A ghost of a smile crossed James' face. "I am sure you are more than capable, but you have been traveling for weeks, and that cannot have been easy in your condition. Rest now. We will have plenty of time to discuss everything later." Beatrice was too tired to argue. She nodded and sat down on the edge of the bed, which was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in weeks. James left and returned a few minutes later with a pitcher of water and a basin, along with clean towels. Then he quietly closed the door, leaving her alone. She washed her face and hands, relishing the feel of the cool water on her skin. Then she lay down on the bed, just for a moment, and immediately fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Beatrice woke, the light coming through the small window had shifted, suggesting several hours had passed. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure of where she was. Then memory rushed back, along with a flutter of anxiety. She pushed herself up, grimacing at the stiffness in her back. The baby was moving, a rolling sensation that was still strange to her even after months of feeling it. She found James in the main room, sitting at the table with papers spread out before him. He looked up when she entered and immediately stood. "You are awake. Good. Are you feeling better?" "Yes, thank you. I did not mean to sleep so long. You needed it." He gestured to the stove where a pot was simmering. "I made some stew. Are you hungry?" Beatrice realized she was ravenous. Very much so. They ate in a silence that was not quite comfortable but not hostile either. The stew was simple but well made, and Beatrice found herself eating more than she had in days. James watched her with an expression she could not quite read. Finally, when they had both finished, he pushed his bowl aside and folded his hands on the table. "We need to talk," he said. Beatrice's stomach tightened with anxiety, but she nodded. "I know. Tell me about the father," James said, "if you are comfortable doing so." Beatrice took a shaky breath. "His name was Thomas. We were engaged to be married. He worked as a clerk in my brother's shipping office. He was charming and attentive, and I thought he loved me. After my parents died, I was living with my brother and his wife. They were not unkind, but I knew I was a burden. When Thomas proposed, it felt like an answer to prayer. We were to be married in the spring, but then—" She paused, swallowing hard. "We got ahead of ourselves. I was foolish and trusting, and I believed him when he said we were as good as married already. When I told him about the baby, his whole demeanor changed. He said he could not marry me now, that it would ruin his reputation. He left town within the week, and I never heard from him again." James listened without interrupting, his gray eyes steady on her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your brother made it clear I was not welcome to stay. The scandal would have affected his business, his standing in society. He gave me a small amount of money and told me to find somewhere else to go. I saw your advertisement a few days later. I know what I did was wrong, deceiving you like that, but I had nowhere else to turn. "And when the baby is born?" James asked. "What were you planning?" "I do not know," Beatrice admitted. "I suppose I hoped that once you saw I was a hard worker, once you saw that I could be useful, that maybe you would let me stay on even if we did not marry. I could work as a housekeeper, perhaps. I just need somewhere safe to have this child and figure out how to survive." James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "And what about love?" he asked quietly. "Did you think about that at all?" The question startled her. "I did not think I had the luxury of considering such things," she said honestly. "I was desperate, Mr. Jensen. I still am. Love seemed like something for people whose lives were not falling apart." "Call me James," he said. "If we are going to figure this out, we should at least be on first-name terms." "James," she repeated, and the name felt strange on her tongue. "And I am Beatrice, or B if you prefer." "Beatrice," he said, as if testing how it sounded. "All right then, Beatrice. Here is what I think. You are right that you deceived me, and I would be lying if I said I was not surprised when I saw you today. But I also understand desperation. I know what it is like to feel like you are out of options. And I meant what I said earlier. That baby needs a name and a father. The world is not kind to children born outside of marriage, and it is even less kind to their mothers." "I know," Beatrice whispered. "So here is what I am proposing," James continued. "We get married as we originally planned. The baby will have my name, and no one needs to know the details of when it was conceived or by whom. As far as the world is concerned, the child will be mine." Beatrice stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? Why? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "I know I do not owe you anything," James said. "But I asked for a wife, and you came all this way. That takes courage, even if you were not entirely truthful in your letters. And that baby did not ask to be brought into this world under these circumstances. The child deserves a fair chance at life. Besides," he added, and now there was a hint of something vulnerable in his expression, "I have been lonely out here. My wife has been gone for 2 years, and while I have made peace with that, I miss having someone to share my life with. Maybe this is not how either of us pictured starting a marriage, but that does not mean it cannot work." "But you do not love me," Beatrice said. "And I do not love you. How can a marriage work without love?" "Love can grow," James said simply. "My parents had an arranged marriage. They barely knew each other on their wedding day. But over the years, they built something real and lasting. I am not saying it will be easy, but I think we can try. We will take it one day at a time, get to know each other and see where it leads. The most important thing right now is that you and that baby have security and a future." Tears were streaming down Beatrice's face again, but this time they were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. "You are a good man, James Jensen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for this kindness." "Just be honest with me from now on," James said. "No more secrets. If this is going to work, we need to trust each other." "I promise," Beatrice said fervently. "No more secrets. Good." James stood and offered her his hand. "Then let us go into town tomorrow and get married. The sooner we make this official, the better. People will talk either way, but at least this way the baby will be legitimate." Beatrice took his hand, marveling at how warm and solid it felt in hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "We are giving each other a chance," James corrected gently. "Now you should get some more rest. Tomorrow is going to be a big day." That night, Beatrice lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind whirling with everything that had happened. She had arrived in Del Rio expecting rejection and shame, and instead she had found kindness and an offer of protection. James was nothing like Thomas. Where Thomas had been all smooth words and empty promises, James was quiet and steady. He had not tried to manipulate or charm her. He had simply offered her a practical solution to an impossible problem, and he had done so with a gentleness that touched her deeply. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. "We are going to be all right," she whispered to the child. "I found us someone good." The next morning, Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed in her best dress, which was not saying much given the state of her wardrobe, and joined James in the main room. He had clearly made an effort as well, changing into clean clothes and combing his hair. They ate breakfast in near silence, both of them nervous about what was to come. The ride back into Del Rio felt surreal. Beatrice kept stealing glances at James, this man who was about to become her husband. He seemed calm, his hands steady on the reins, but she noticed he was quieter than he had been the day before. She wondered what he was thinking, if he was having second thoughts. The church in Del Rio was a simple adobe building with a wooden cross mounted above the door. The priest, Father Miguel, was an older man with kind eyes and a weathered face. James had clearly sent word ahead because the priest was expecting them. He looked at Beatrice's condition without judgment, which was a small mercy in itself. "Are you both here of your own free will?" Father Miguel asked, looking between them. "Yes," James said firmly. "Yes," Beatrice echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. The ceremony was brief and simple. There were no flowers, no music, no guests. Just the two of them standing before the altar, speaking vows that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. When the priest told James he could kiss his bride, there was an awkward moment where they both hesitated. Then James leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Beatrice's lips. It was brief and almost businesslike, but Beatrice felt a flutter in her chest nonetheless. "Congratulations," Father Miguel said with a warm smile. "May God bless your union and the child you are bringing into the world." They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, Beatrice Sullivan became Beatrice Jensen. As they left the church, James took her hand and helped her up into the wagon. The gesture was protective and proprietary, and Beatrice felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a deep awareness that her life had just changed irrevocably. She was married now, bound to a man she barely knew. The future stretched out before her, uncertain but no longer quite so terrifying. On the ride back to the ranch, James was the one who broke the silence. "We should stop at the general store," he said. "You will need things for the baby. Clothing, blankets, diapers, and you probably need some things for yourself as well." Beatrice had not thought that far ahead, too focused on the immediate crisis to consider the practical needs of the coming weeks. "I have a little money left," she said hesitantly. "Not much, but I can contribute." "You are my wife now," James said, and there was something almost fierce in his voice. "What is mine is yours. That includes money for the things you and the baby need." They spent nearly 2 hours in the general store, and Beatrice was overwhelmed by James' generosity. He insisted on buying fabric for baby clothes, soft flannel and cotton that she could sew in the coming weeks. He bought blankets and diapers, a cradle that the storekeeper assured them was sturdy and well made. He also bought things for Beatrice herself, practical dresses in her size, which was larger than it had been before the pregnancy, and undergarments and a warm shawl for cool evenings. The storekeeper's wife, a plump woman named Martha, fussed over Beatrice with a mix of curiosity and approval. "It is so good to see James settling down again," she said, folding the fabric carefully. "He has been alone too long, and with a baby coming, how wonderful." "When are you due, dear?" "In about 10 weeks, Beatrice said, trying to smile. "Well, you let me know if you need anything," Martha said warmly. "I have raised 5 children of my own, so I know a thing or two about babies. And welcome to Del Rio, Mrs. Jensen. I am sure you will fit right in." The use of her new name startled Beatrice, but she managed to thank Martha graciously. As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Beatrice felt a strange sense of unreality. Was this really her life now? Was she really married to this quiet rancher, about to have a baby in this dusty Texas town? The days that followed fell into a pattern. James was up before dawn every day, tending to the cattle and horses, mending fences, doing the endless work that came with running a ranch. Beatrice kept the house, which was a more manageable task than she had expected given how small it was. She cooked their meals, learning to work with the unfamiliar ingredients and the wood stove that had a temperamental personality. She sewed baby clothes, hemming the soft fabric with careful stitches. And slowly, carefully, she and James began to get to know each other. They talked in the evenings after supper, sitting at the table or sometimes on the porch when the heat of the day had finally broken. James told her about his life, about growing up on a ranch in Montana, about coming to Texas to start his own place. He told her about his first wife, Sarah, who had been full of life and laughter until the fever had taken her. "She would have liked you," James said one evening, his eyes distant with memory. "She always said I needed someone practical, someone who would not put up with my stubborn ways." "And do you have stubborn ways?" Beatrice asked with a small smile. "More than I like to admit," James said, and there was humor in his voice. "Sarah used to say I was as immovable as the mountains when I got an idea in my head." Beatrice shared her own stories, about growing up in Philadelphia, about her parents and the life she had left behind. She told him about her love of books, about how she had dreamed of becoming a teacher before her parents died and her world fell apart. James listened with quiet attention, asking questions and seeming genuinely interested in her answers. They were building something, Beatrice realized. Not love, not yet, but the foundation for it. Trust and respect and a growing comfort with each other's presence. James never pushed her, never demanded anything physical beyond that single kiss at their wedding. He was patient and gentle, and Beatrice found herself relaxing around him in a way she had not anticipated. One evening, about 2 weeks after the wedding, Beatrice was sitting on the porch sewing when she felt a particularly strong kick from the baby. She gasped and pressed her hand to her belly, and James, who had been working nearby, immediately came to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern clear in his voice. "Yes," Beatrice assured him. "The baby just kicked hard. Here, give me your hand." She took his hand without thinking and placed it on her belly where the baby was moving. James' eyes widened as he felt the flutter of life beneath his palm. For a long moment he just stood there, his hand warm against her, and when he looked up at her, there was something almost reverent in his expression. "That is amazing," he said softly. "I have delivered plenty of calves and foals, but feeling a human baby move like that, it is different." "It is strange," Beatrice agreed. "Sometimes I forget there is a whole person growing inside me, and then they remind me with a good kick to the ribs." James left his hand where it was, and the baby kicked again, as if responding to his presence. He laughed, a genuine sound of delight that transformed his face. Beatrice found herself smiling too, caught up in the moment. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with shared wonder at the miracle of new life. "Have you thought about names?" James asked, finally removing his hand. "Not really," Beatrice admitted. "I have been too focused on just surviving to think that far ahead." "Well, we have some time," James said, "but we should probably start thinking about it. That baby is going to need something to be called." The conversation turned to names, and they spent the evening tossing ideas back and forth. It was comfortable and easy, and Beatrice realized with a start that she was happy. Despite everything, despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she was happy in this moment. As the weeks passed, Beatrice's belly grew larger and her body began preparing for the birth. She was uncomfortable most of the time, her back aching and her feet swollen. James was endlessly patient with her moods, which swung wildly between weepy and irritable. He brought her cool water when the heat became too much. He rubbed her feet in the evenings without being asked. He made sure she rested when she needed to, even when she protested that there was work to be done. Martha from the general store came to visit several times, bringing food and advice. She examined Beatrice with experienced hands and declared that both mother and baby seemed to be doing well. "That baby is sitting right where it should be," she said with satisfaction. "You have got a few more weeks yet, but when your time comes, you send James to fetch me. I have helped deliver more babies than I can count, and I will make sure you are taken care of." The prospect of childbirth terrified Beatrice. She had heard horror stories from other women, tales of long labors and terrible pain. But Martha was reassuring. "It is hard work, no denying that," she said. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do, you just have to trust it." One evening, about a month after the wedding, Beatrice and James were sitting on the porch watching the sun set. The sky was ablaze with color, oranges and pinks and purples that seemed impossible in their vividness. Beatrice was quiet, her hands resting on her belly, and James seemed content to sit in silence beside her. But there was something Beatrice had been wanting to say, something that had been building inside her for days. "James," she said finally, "I want to thank you." He turned to look at her, his expression curious. "For what? For all of this?" "For marrying me, for giving the baby your name, for being so kind when you had every right to be angry. You have given me a second chance at life, and I do not think I will ever be able to fully express how much that means to me." James was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Then he said, "Beatrice, I did not do this out of pity, I want you to know that. Yes, I wanted to help you, but I also wanted a wife. I wanted someone to share this life with. You are giving me that just as much as I am giving you security. We are helping each other." "I know," Beatrice said. "But still, you could have sent me away. Most men would have." "I am not most men," James said simply. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "And you are not most women. You crossed half the country alone while pregnant, knowing you might be turned away at the end of it. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Beatrice said wryly. "Maybe both," James allowed. "But I am glad you came. I know this is not the marriage either of us imagined, but I think we are doing all right. Do not you?" Beatrice looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the strong lines of his face, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet strength that radiated from him. She thought about how safe she felt here, how he had never once made her feel ashamed or unwanted. She thought about the way he had touched her belly and felt the baby move with such wonder. And she realized that somewhere along the way her feelings had begun to shift. It was not love, not yet, but it was something. Warmth and affection and a deep gratitude that was beginning to transform into something more. "Yes," she said softly, "I think we are doing all right." The baby came on a hot August night when the air was thick and still. Beatrice had been feeling strange all day, a tightening in her belly that came and went. She had mentioned it to James at supper, and he had immediately offered to ride for Martha, but Beatrice had insisted it was probably nothing. But as the evening wore on, the pains became more regular and more intense, and finally, she had to admit that her time had come. James rode to town faster than she had ever seen him move, and he returned with Martha and her daughter Clara within the hour. By that time, Beatrice was gripping the bedpost and breathing through contractions that felt like they might tear her in half. Martha took one look at her and immediately began issuing orders, sending Clara for hot water and clean linens, making Beatrice as comfortable as possible. "You are doing fine," Martha said, her voice calm and reassuring. "First babies take their time. Just breathe through the pains and rest in between." The labor went on for hours. Beatrice lost track of time, caught in a cycle of pain and brief respite. James hovered outside the bedroom door, clearly wanting to help but knowing he would just be in the way. At one point, when Beatrice cried out particularly loudly, she heard him demand to know if she was all right, and Martha called back that everything was proceeding normally. Finally, as dawn was beginning to break, Martha said, "All right, Beatrice, the baby is coming now. On the next pain, you push as hard as you can." Beatrice did as she was told, bearing down with all her strength. The pain was incredible, beyond anything she had imagined, but she pushed through it, driven by a primal instinct to get this child out of her body. She heard Martha giving instructions, felt hands supporting her, and then, with one final push that left her feeling like she had been torn in two, the baby slipped free for a moment. There was silence and Beatrice's heart stopped. Then a thin, wailing cry filled the room and Martha laughed with delight. "You have a son," she said, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Beatrice started crying, overwhelmed with relief and joy and exhaustion. Martha quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Beatrice's arms. He was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a scrunched-up face. His eyes were closed, but his mouth was open as he continued to cry. "Hello," Beatrice whispered, her voice shaking. "Hello, little one. I am your mother." The door opened, and James appeared, looking almost as pale as Beatrice felt. His eyes went immediately to the bundle in her arms, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Is he all right?" he asked. "Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Martha said with satisfaction. "Your wife did beautifully, and your son is as healthy as they come." James sank down on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the baby. "A son," he said, his voice full of wonder. Then he looked at Beatrice, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "You were so brave," he said. "I could hear you and I felt so useless not being able to help." "You did help," Beatrice said. "Just knowing you were there made a difference." James reached out tentatively, and Beatrice shifted the baby so he could see better. The infant had stopped crying and was making small snuffling sounds. His tiny hand emerged from the blanket, fingers curling and uncurling. James touched one finger to the baby's palm, and immediately the tiny hand closed around it in a reflex grip. James' face transformed with emotion, and when he looked back at Beatrice, she saw tears in his eyes. "That baby needs my name now," James had said that first day, and Beatrice had not fully understood what he meant. But seeing him now, seeing the way he looked at this child who was not biologically his, she understood. He had claimed this baby as his own, had given him legitimacy and a future. And in that moment, Beatrice fell in love with her husband. It was not a dramatic realization, not a bolt of lightning. It was simply a quiet certainty, a feeling that settled into her bones and made itself at home. This man who had shown her nothing but kindness and patience, who had protected her when she was vulnerable, who was now looking at her baby with such tenderness, this man had her heart. "What should we name him?" James asked softly. Beatrice had been thinking about this for weeks. "Joseph," she said. "Joseph Jensen, if that is all right with you." "Joseph," James repeated, testing the name. Then he smiled, that rare, full smile that lit up his entire face. Joseph Jensen. Yes, I like that. Welcome to the world, Joseph. Martha and Clara stayed for a few more hours, making sure Beatrice was settled and showing her how to nurse the baby. Joseph took to it naturally, his small mouth working eagerly. By the time Martha left, Beatrice was exhausted but content, lying in bed with Joseph sleeping in the cradle beside her. James came in and sat in the chair by the bed. "You should rest," he said. "You have been through an ordeal." "I know," Beatrice said, "but I wanted to talk to you first. James, what you have done for us, giving Joseph your name, claiming him as your son, it means everything to me. I want you to know that I see it and I appreciate it more than words can say." "He is my son," James said simply. "Blood does not make a family. Love does. And I already love that little boy. I loved him the first time I felt him kick, and I love him even more now that I have met him." Beatrice felt tears slipping down her cheeks again. "I love you," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I know we have only known each other a short time, and I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I have fallen in love with you, James Jensen. You are a good man, and I am so grateful that I found you." James stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and moved to sit on the edge of the bed. He took her hand in his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you fell asleep at the table, exhausted from traveling. You were so vulnerable but also so strong. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more. Watching you make this house a home, talking with you in the evenings, seeing you with Joseph, I cannot imagine my life without you now." Beatrice pulled his hand to her lips and kissed it. "We are a family now," she said. "Yes," James agreed. "We are a family." He leaned down and kissed her properly for the first time since their wedding day. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and new beginnings. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "Get some rest," he said. "I will watch over both of you." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and learning how to care for an infant. Joseph was a good baby for the most part, but he still needed to be fed every few hours, and Beatrice was constantly exhausted. James helped as much as he could, changing diapers and walking the floor with Joseph when he was fussy. He continued to do the ranch work during the day, but he always made sure to be home in time to help Beatrice with the evening chores. Martha visited regularly, bringing food and offering advice. Other women from town began to stop by as well, curious about the new Mrs. Jensen and her baby. Beatrice was surprised by how welcoming they were, how no one seemed to question the timeline of the pregnancy or speculate about Joseph's parentage. Either they were too polite to mention it, or James' acceptance of the child was enough to silence any gossip. As Joseph grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything around him. He had James' gray-blue eyes, which Beatrice found ironic given that he was not biologically James' son. But more than his physical appearance, Joseph seemed to have James' calm temperament. He was content to lie in his cradle and watch the world, rarely fussing unless he was hungry or needed changing. James doted on the boy, and watching them together never failed to make Beatrice's heart swell with love. He talked to Joseph constantly, narrating what he was doing as he went about his chores. He made toys for him, simple rattles and wooden animals that Joseph would grasp with his tiny hands. And in the evenings, he would hold the baby and sing to him in a deep, off-key voice that made Beatrice smile. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under James' careful management, and Beatrice found that she enjoyed the work of keeping their home. She planted a small garden near the house, growing vegetables and herbs that supplemented their meals. She sewed curtains for the windows and made cushions for the chairs, slowly adding touches that made the house feel more lived in and welcoming. And every day, her love for James grew deeper and stronger. They were not just husband and wife now, but true partners. They made decisions together, talked through problems, and supported each other through the challenges that came with ranch life. James consulted her on everything from which cattle to sell to how to expand the house now that their family was growing. Beatrice, in turn, shared her ideas and opinions freely, and James listened and valued her input. One evening in early autumn, when Joseph was about 2 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, James and Beatrice sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air had finally cooled from the oppressive heat of summer, and there was a pleasant breeze that rustled through the mesquite trees. "I have been thinking," James said, breaking the comfortable silence. "This house is getting a bit small for the three of us. I would like to add on a proper bedroom for us and turn the current bedroom into a nursery for Joseph. Maybe add a sitting room as well. What do you think?" "I think that would be wonderful," Beatrice said. "Though I feel guilty having you spend money on renovations when you have already been so generous." "Beatrice," James said, turning to look at her, "this is your home, our home. I want you to be comfortable here, and I want Joseph to have space to grow. Besides, I am hoping this will not be our only child. If we are blessed with more children, we will need the room." The suggestion that they would have more children together made Beatrice's heart skip a beat. They had been so focused on Joseph and settling into their marriage that they had not really discussed the physical aspect of their relationship. James had been respectful of the time she needed to recover from childbirth, never pushing her or making demands. But now, with his words, he was opening that door. "I would like more children," Beatrice said softly. "With you, I want to give Joseph brothers and sisters, a real family." James took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then we will make that happen," he said, "when you are ready. There is no rush." But later that night, after they had checked on Joseph one last time and were preparing for bed, Beatrice made a decision. She crossed the room to where James was standing and placed her hand on his chest. He looked down at her questioningly, and she rose on her toes to kiss him. It was not like their previous kisses, chaste and almost brotherly. This was different, full of intent and desire. James responded immediately, his arms coming around her to pull her close. The kiss deepened, and Beatrice felt heat spreading through her body. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Are you sure?" James asked, his voice rough. "I do not want to rush you. I am sure," Beatrice said. "You are my husband and I love you. I want to be your wife in every way." That night they became husband and wife in truth. James was gentle and patient, taking his time and making sure Beatrice was comfortable. It was different from her experience with Thomas, which had been rushed and furtive and left her feeling used. With James, it felt like a completion, a final piece clicking into place. They moved together slowly, learning each other's bodies, and when it was over, they lay tangled together, both of them smiling in the darkness. "I love you," James whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you too," Beatrice replied, feeling more content than she had ever been in her life. The months passed, turning to seasons. Joseph grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby who could sit up on his own and babble endlessly. He adored James, reaching for him whenever he entered a room, and James' face would light up every time. The house renovation was completed, and they moved into the new bedroom, giving Joseph his own space. The sitting room became Beatrice's favorite place, a cozy spot where she could sew or read while Joseph played on a blanket on the floor. Del Rio slowly became home. Beatrice made friends among the other ranch wives, women who welcomed her into their community. She attended church services every Sunday, where Father Miguel always greeted her warmly. She helped organize a school fundraiser and donated books from her own collection to start a small library. She was no longer the desperate, pregnant woman who had arrived on the stagecoach. She was Mrs. Jensen, respected member of the community, wife and mother. In the spring, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. Unlike the first time, this pregnancy was a source of joy rather than fear and shame. She told James over breakfast one morning, and he let out a whoop of delight that startled Joseph into crying. He immediately apologized and scooped up the baby, then pulled Beatrice into a hug that lasted several minutes. "Another baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Joseph is going to be a big brother." This pregnancy was easier than the first had been, perhaps because Beatrice was not consumed with worry and fear. She felt healthy and strong, and while she experienced the usual discomforts, she also felt a deep sense of peace. James was even more protective than before, constantly fussing over her and making sure she was not overdoing it. Joseph, now a year old and walking, seemed to sense something was different and became more clingy with his mother. The baby came in late winter, during a cold snap that was unusual for Texas. Beatrice went into labor in the middle of the night, and James rode through the freezing darkness to fetch Martha. The labor was shorter this time, only lasting a few hours, and by dawn, they had a daughter. She was tiny and perfect, with a cap of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. James held her with tears streaming down his face, and Beatrice felt her heart could not possibly hold any more love than it did in that moment. "What should we name her?" James asked, gazing down at the squirming bundle. "I was thinking Alina," Beatrice said. "After your mother. You said she passed when you were young. I thought it would be nice to honor her." James looked up at her with such love in his eyes that Beatrice felt breathless. "Alina Jensen," he said. "That is perfect. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for everything." With 2 children now, life became even busier. Beatrice spent her days caring for Alina and chasing after Joseph, who was into everything. James hired a young man from town named Miguel to help with the ranch work, which freed him up to spend more time at the house helping Beatrice. The expansion they had done the previous year now felt almost too small, and James joked about needing to build a whole new wing. Joseph was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit next to her cradle for hours, talking to her in his own toddler language and bringing her his favorite toys. Alina, for her part, seemed to find her brother endlessly entertaining. She would smile and coo at him, and Joseph would beam with pride at making her happy. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The ranch continued to prosper, and James' reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread throughout the region. He was elected to the town council and became an active member of the community. Beatrice started teaching a small class for the children in town who could not afford formal schooling, finally fulfilling her dream of becoming a teacher. She held the classes in the church twice a week, and the parents were deeply grateful for the opportunity. Joseph grew into a thoughtful, kind boy who loved the ranch and the animals. He followed James everywhere, learning how to care for the cattle and horses, how to mend fences and read the weather. Alina was more spirited, full of energy and curiosity. She wanted to do everything her brother and father did, climbing trees and riding horses from an almost impossibly young age. When Joseph was 5 and Alina was 3, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Samuel and Benjamin. James was beside himself with joy at having 4 children, and the house that had once felt too big for one lonely rancher was now bursting with life and noise. The children grew up knowing they were loved and secure. Joseph knew the truth of his parentage. Beatrice and James had decided early on that they would not lie to him about it. When he was old enough to understand, they sat him down and explained that James was not his biological father, but had chosen to be his father in every way that mattered. Joseph listened gravely, then said, "So Papa wanted me even though he did not have to." When they confirmed that was true, he had simply nodded and said, "Then I am lucky." He never treated it as a shameful secret, and his siblings never saw him as anything other than their full brother. As the years went by, Beatrice often found herself reflecting on that day she had stepped off the stagecoach in Del Rio, terrified and alone. She had been so certain her life was over, that she had ruined everything. But instead, she had found something she had never expected: true love, a real family, and a place where she belonged. One evening, when the children were all tucked into bed and the house was finally quiet, Beatrice and James sat on the porch as they had so many times before. They were older now, with lines around their eyes and gray threading through their hair, but the love between them had only grown stronger with time. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "Taking me in that day, taking on all the complications I brought with me?" James turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes steady and warm. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to live again." "You saved me," Beatrice said softly. "I was drowning and you threw me a lifeline." "We saved each other," James corrected, pulling her close. "That is what love does. It saves us, heals us, makes us better than we were before." They sat there in the gathering darkness, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and from inside the house came the sound of one of the twins calling out in his sleep. But Beatrice felt no anxiety, no fear. She was home, surrounded by love, and that was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The ranch continued to thrive for many years. Joseph eventually took over much of the day-to-day operations, proving to be as skilled a rancher as his father. Alina married a young lawyer from San Antonio and moved to the city, though she visited often with her own growing family. The twins, Samuel and Benjamin, went into business together, starting a freight company that transported goods between Del Rio and the larger cities. Beatrice and James grew old together, their love never wavering. They became grandparents many times over, their house always full of children and laughter during holidays. Martha, who had become one of Beatrice's dearest friends, often joked that Beatrice had brought new life to Del Rio in more ways than one. On their 25th wedding anniversary, James surprised Beatrice by taking her into town for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a rare luxury, and Beatrice wore her best dress and felt like a young woman again. Over dessert, James reached across the table and took her hand. 25 years, he said. "I still remember the day you stepped off that stagecoach, so scared and brave at the same time. I knew in that moment that you were going to change my life, though I had no idea how much." "You changed mine," Beatrice said, squeezing his hand. "You gave me everything, James. A home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, you gave me love. Real, lasting love." "That baby needed my name," James said, echoing the words he had spoken that first day. "But I needed you and Joseph just as much. You made me whole again." They finished their dinner and walked slowly back to the wagon, hand in hand. The night was clear and cool, perfect weather for a drive home. As they rode through the darkness, Beatrice leaned against James' shoulder and thought about how far they had come. From strangers thrust together by circumstance to partners who could not imagine life without each other. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. Years later, when James was 72 and Beatrice was 68, James passed away peacefully in his sleep. He had been working on the ranch until the very end, refusing to slow down despite Beatrice's gentle nagging. She woke one morning to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, finally at rest. The grief threatened to overwhelm her, but she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, all of them sharing in the loss of a man who had been so much to so many. At the funeral, Joseph spoke about his father, his voice strong despite the tears streaming down his face. "He was not the man who gave me life," Joseph said, "but he was the man who gave me everything else. He taught me what it means to be a father, to be a husband, to be a good man. He showed me that family is not about blood but about choice and commitment and love. I was the luckiest boy in the world to have him as my papa." Beatrice lived for another 10 years after James' death. She stayed on the ranch, which Joseph ran with the same care and dedication his father had shown. She spent her days surrounded by family, teaching her grandchildren to read, tending her garden, and sharing stories of the old days. She never remarried. The love she had shared with James was the kind that came once in a lifetime, and she was content to live the rest of her days honoring his memory. On a warm summer evening, sitting on the porch where she and James had spent so many hours together, Beatrice closed her eyes and thought about her life. She thought about the frightened girl who had arrived in Del Rio so many years ago, heavy with child and desperate for salvation. She thought about the kind rancher who had looked past her deception and seen someone worth loving. She thought about their children, their grandchildren, the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination. "I found you," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "And you found me, and together we made something beautiful." The next morning, Joseph found her still sitting in her chair on the porch, a peaceful smile on her face. She had passed in the night as quietly and gently as James had. They buried her next to him, under the wide Texas sky, on the land they had loved. The ranch stayed in the Jensen family for generations. Joseph's children and grandchildren continued to work the land, and the story of how it all began, of a mail-order bride who arrived heavy with child, and the rancher who said the baby needed his name, became family legend. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of love that transcended circumstances, of family built on choice rather than blood. And on warm summer evenings, when the children played in the yard and the cattle lowed in the distance, sometimes it seemed like you could hear the echo of laughter from that porch, as if the spirits of Beatrice and James were still there, still watching over the family they had created together, still in love after all these years. Their legacy was not just the ranch or the family name, but the lesson they had taught everyone who knew them. That the measure of a person is not where they come from or the mistakes they have made, but what they choose to do with the chances they are given. Beatrice had been given a second chance by James, and she had made the most of it, building a life of purpose and meaning. James had been given the chance to love again after loss, and he had opened his heart fully and without reservation. In the end, theirs was a simple story, played out countless times across the American frontier. Two people, brought together by need and circumstance, choosing to make something good out of difficult beginnings. But to those who knew them, to the children they raised and the community they served, it was so much more than that. It was proof that love could heal, that families could be built on more than just blood, that second chances were worth taking. The Jensen Ranch stood for more than 100 years, a testament to the vision and hard work of James and the courage of Beatrice. And though the buildings eventually crumbled and the land was divided and sold, the story remained, passed down through generations as a reminder of where they had come from and the values that had sustained them. Beatrice had arrived in Del Rio with nothing but a scandalous secret and a desperate hope. She had left behind a legacy of love, family, and the knowledge that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to exactly where we need to be. James had offered her his name and his protection, never imagining that in return she would give him a reason to live again, a family to cherish, and a love that would sustain him through all the years of his life. And so the story ended as all the best stories do, with love triumphant, family secure, and two souls who had found each other against all odds finally at rest together. Their love story complete, but never forgotten.